Okay, it works. The darn thing works. So that was my first treadle, and yeah, that didn't work so good. So this is prototype number 2 down here, this guy, and he works pretty good. And I'm pleased with the amount of spring. I've temporarily fastened it to my veranda post here just to get rid of some of the wiggle wobble out of it. But I got thinking when I started doing this, because I have absolutely no skill. I've never turned wood before in my life. And I got thinking about in the 1800's on the frontier, the most valuable thing to them was their time. They had a lot of stuff to do in any given day, and they didn't have time to practice stuff. So when they needed to learn a new skill, they learned it as they were doing something. And an example that comes to mind is our first log cabin was a hewn one, inside and out, with compound dovetail notches. Pretty difficult notch to make. And the first log on the deck, I have 2 or 3 books out and manuals on how to make a compound dovetail notch. And I whittled away. It took me about 45 minutes. And when I got all finished, I was pretty proud of myself. And then I realized I'd made a mirror image of what I was supposed to. Anyway, log didn't go to waste because it was on the long wall, so that log became a short wall log in the cabin. But the pioneers wouldn't practice making notches on scrap pieces of wood. They'd make a notch and they'd lay the first log. And as their skills got better, as the log cabin went up, they would make them quicker, faster, and better. And I think that's how they gathered skills. So that's what I'm working on here. I figured I could just turn a piece of wood, a piece of green wood, which would have been really easy. But no, I decided to start with a real old, hard, dense piece of dry walnut. But I wanted to make a tool. I figured there's no sense wasting my time. So what I'm doing here is I'm making a mandrel. The mandrel is used when one's turning bowls. So you can see how I've got the rope wrapped around this chunk of wood that I've roughed out here. But the mandrel's needed when one starts to turn bowls. And so what I'm trying to do essentially is make a spool. And I want it about 7 to 8 inches long. And my finger spans about 8 inches. So by the time I get finished and get it cut off, it should be 7 to 8 inches, which would be just about ideal. And it'll look something like a spool. So I'm trying to taper it at both ends. And then I'll show you how it works when I get to bowl making, which is going to be another task altogether. Anyway, so I've used a roughing gouge to rough it out, and I've got my shape. So I'm going to use a skew now to try to get this part rather smooth, and then taper this out to a bit of a flare, which should keep the rope running on that part of it when I'm bowl turning. So I don't want it too smooth because I want this to have some grip on it. So, but we'll get it roughed out here and see if we can actually make our first tool for the lathe. Well, it turned out pretty good actually for my first piece of turned wood, and it was hard. So basically I hope you can see that it's kind of like, looks like a spool. So the one end I'll put a hole in for the pin on my puppet on the lathe. On the other end, I'm going to drive in 4 square nails and then cut them off and then sharpen them to points. So basically the mandrel will get driven into the block of wood that I want to turn a bowl out of. So that gets driven into the bottom of the bowl. So you flatten it off, you've got it roughed out, and you drive those 4 pins into the bottom of the wood. So that holds it for turning. This end will have a hole in it for the puppet. And now I've got a spindle for my rope, and the slight flare I've left on this should keep the rope sort of running in that area. Anyway, I'm a long way from making a bowl, but I have made my first tool here. And I think what I'm going to try before I bowl making, we need a new rolling pin. So I'm going to do that out of green wood, and we'll see how that goes. This has been a real learning experience for me because this was my first tool rest, and it's going to work. So it sits out here like so, the pin at the other end to hold it. And that's going to be a great tool rest for turning bowls that are bigger diameter. But I quickly found out when I tried to turn that, the mandrel here, that my tool was too far out. So I got a whole bunch of chatter. So I started thinking that maybe I could build a rest that was closer. Now this is kind of temporary, but it gives me a bit of an angle, keeps my tool just below center of the 2 pins on the puppet, and that reduced the chatter significantly and will allow me to turn that out of that walnut's about 40 some years dried in my barn. So and hard, so that worked quite well. I just got to figure out a way now. So it's sort of temporary. I'd like to get a way to sort of move it to different positions, but that's going to work for spindle turning, and this is going to work for bowl plates and things that are a bigger diameter. Anyway, I'm going to see if I can find myself a piece of ash, and we're going to make ourselves a rolling pin. Who needs a lathe? You could roll dough with that right now. Anyway, that's going to work good. I got it sort of roughed out, and typically in the 1800's, they made spindles for chairs and things that they had to turn on lathes from green wood. So this was a live tree this morning, and it's green, so it's going to turn pretty good, I think, on that lathe and make a good rolling pin. But as much as I'd like to finish it, we've got company coming for supper, and this has been one cold day, and I'm ready to go in and get by the fire and get ready for my guests to come. I've got to clean up a little bit. So once again, we have the privilege of having the Stubbs for dinner here at the Cedar Hollow Tavern. So we've got Melony and Mark and Fergie here, who Yeah, Fergie was a house guest with us for a couple weeks. That was a bit of fun. Anyway, we're cooking up a wild turkey that I was able to procure. Well, actually, Jenny, my musket, did most of the work, but Melony does most of the cooking for the 49th Regiment of Foot, and she's used to feeding a lot of people and a lot better at this open hearth cooking than I am. Particularly if you saw my sourdough bread. Anyway, so what are we doing for dinner tonight, Melony?
So along with the turkey, we're gonna raid the root cellar, have
Good
some
idea.
potatoes, some turnip. I think they're still really good, so we'll eat those, and add a little dressing to go with the turkey.
Perfect. You hungry, Mark?
Absolutely.
I know Fergie, he's been sniffing around that turkey all day. He's gonna burn his nose in the tin. Should we have a look, see how it's doing?
Yeah, that would be good, we should check it for sure.
Well, maybe it needs a little turn here, Melanie. How do you think we're doing there?
Wow, it's cooking really well, for sure.
That bacon's gonna help the sort of dry meat part of that wild turkey, but I find once you've had wild turkey, you wouldn't go back to domestic.
Yeah.
You're that much better.
Much more flavor for sure, the bacon will actually add more flavor. Yeah, we've got a lot of good drippings coming from it, so that'll make some great gravy to go along with it.
Anyway, I'm sure
Your
looking
turn?
forward to that, and they're gonna have, yeah, like you say, that there's lots of drippings in there for the
Mm-hmm.
gravy.
Very good.
Perfect. How's that for closeness? That
Great.
good?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it. So while we're waiting for that turkey to cook there, Melanie, aside from having the privilege of having Melanie's fine cooking for dinner, Melanie's a seamstress, and she's making me this fine gift here. Or I think we're gonna do some barter, aren't we? You want something made,
Yeah,
I
I
think.
think that's probably a fair trade.
Forge or in the shop or something.
I haven't really decided, but you'll have to decide what's fair for this piece of clothing.
Anyway, my old West kit's plumb wore out. I mean, it's done, it's finished, so it's pretty threadbare, and I'll be making some char cloth out of it, but this looks like it's coming along, Melanie.
Yeah, well, we'll try and fit it on you. I know we did a fitting previously, but this is the end result, so I wanna make sure that this fits before I start putting the buttons on and finalizing the garment, so let's see how it's looking.
This is exciting.
Nope, down. There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
We're in.
Oh. Good. Well,
What do you
definitely fits
think?
good.
I'm gonna look like Dapper Dan.
Yeah.
So you're working on the
I
pockets
still have
now?
this pocket to sew, and I've got to put the buttons and buttonholes on.
Well, that's perfect.
It's good.
Yeah, you can even,
You look pretty sharp.
yeah, it's gonna work. Great job, Emily. Thank you very much. It came off easier than it went on.
It did.
So how long till supper, do you think?
Oh, another hour or two for sure. Want to make sure that bird's cooked.
A little Mark, can you wait another hour or two?
I'm near frozen to death at this point.
You know, it's funny, you talk about the architecture, so in trying to keep this as authentic as possible, no insulation in the roof, no insulation in the floor, and last night, or I should say this morning, the temperature was minus 22 Fahrenheit, which is about minus 30 Celsius, so. It's nice and warm by the fire,
Yeah.
but you
Get
don't wanna
close
get
to
too
fire.
far, and it's reasonably warm in the sleeping loft, but aside from that, you don't wanna get too far from the hearth.
No, we do not.
Anyway, yeah, I'm looking forward to that dinner.
So Peter, I just have this pocket that I'm gonna be sewing on for you. Once I get that on, I'll do the buttonholes and the buttons, and then you've got a nice new waistcoat to wear.
Perfect, perfect. I'll save it for go to meeting. Okay,
And then you can cut up that old one of yours.
oh, it's pretty bad, eh? What's the,
Yeah, it is pretty bad, actually, but how long have you had that?
3 days longer than forever.
Yeah,
So, what's the rule of thumb for how many stitches to the inch?
I try to do them as tight as I can. That makes a stronger seam.
So what do you
I'm probably
Yeah.
not as good as some other hand stitchers. Hand sewing is not my favorite thing, so you better be honored that I'm actually spending this
Okay.
much time hand sewing this garment for you.
I got it.
I've only done a few fully hand sewn garments, and but I've enjoyed doing this. I haven't had a chance to do this in a while, so this has really been an enjoyable project for sure.
Perfect.
This is just a basic slip stitch.
Here, one finished mandrel for bowl turning, plates, bowls, anything around. And I'm rather pleased with that. That's going to work as well as the moccasins I built last week. Anyway, we had a lovely turkey dinner with the Stubbses last night, and it's as cold today as it was yesterday. And I'm going to get back at making that rolling pin I started yesterday. When I'm doing things and trying to learn these new skills, I like to talk a wee bit of the history. And in some subjects, it's difficult to cover it in a wee bit, but with the rolling pin, there literally is a wee bit of history. So its origins are 9th century Etruscans, and go figure that. So northern Italy, if you would, where pasta comes from, and an infinite variety of pasta recipes, that they had a need, and so they created something, and that's where a lot of inventions come from. So the rolling pin was essentially just a round piece of wood that they would roll the dough out with. It didn't change much until the late 1800s, and I believe the fellow's name is Wells. He was an African American, and he patented the rolling pin that we know today. So he put an axle through it, or a rod if you would, so that the handle stayed stationary while the roller spun on it, and it was a much more ergonomic tool. But that's a lot. It's a few hundred years between just a simple dowel and the rolling pin we think of today. And the other thing, I have a fellow down in New Zealand that wrote me, and he said, don't you find it funny that in the last 100 years we've lost the skills of the previous 2,000 to 3,000? So in the time I got remaining on this, I plan to try to relearn as many of those old skills as I can. And it's quite a learning curve on this lathe, but I'm kind of liking it. So I'm going to see if I can turn out a rolling pin.